Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. And, you might think you know this one, the Asha Degree case. It's been one of those mysteries that's haunted people for over 20 years, right?
Absolutely.
But I guarantee you there's a detail in our source material today. It's a whole podcast script laying out the whole story, a detail that's going to make you rethink everything you thought you knew about this case. We're talking about a buried backpack.
A buried backpack.
Found miles from Asha's home.
Miles away.
With stuff inside that her family had never even seen before.
Yeah, that's the detail that always gets me.
So before we fully unpack that whole backpack thing, let's rewind and set the scene for people.
Okay.
Asha Degree, 9 years old, living in Shelby, North Carolina with her mom, her dad, and her older brother at church on Sundays. Loved basketball.
A normal kid.
A totally ordinary life.
Right.
Which is what makes her disappearance on Valentine's Day 2000 so scary.
You're absolutely right. It's the normalcy that makes it so unsettling. There were no, big problems at home, no warning signs. This wasn't a troubled kid running away.
Right.
Which is why what happened on the night of February 13th is so confusing.
Okay, so tell me about that night.
So there's this huge thunderstorm.
Yeah.
It knocks out the power. Asha's dad checks on her and her brother around 4 a.m. They're both asleep. But sometime between 3:45 and 4:15 a.m.,
Asha disappears.
just gone.
Gone.
Vanished. And you would think that would be the biggest shock to this family. But it gets weirder.
It does.
Two people driving along Highway 18 early that morning report seeing a little girl walking alone. They said she looked just like Asha.
In the middle of a storm?
In a white t-shirt and pants. During a storm,
Right.
one of the drivers even tried to stop and help her, but she ran into the woods.
And that's the detail that adds another layer to this whole thing. If we look at this from a forensic psychology point of view, you gotta ask, why wouldn't a 9-year-old go to an adult for help? Especially during a storm, right?
Right.
Was she scared? Had someone told her not to talk to strangers? Or did she maybe even know the person driving the car? This really throws a wrench in that whole runaway theory. Yeah, it's like something out of a horror movie. You see a kid out in the dark alone, and you want to help, but she runs away.
Exactly.
And all of this happened before they found that backpack, which was miles away from her house and miles away from where those drivers saw her on Highway 18.
The distance is super important here. We're talking 26 miles. There's no way Asha could have walked that far in the time she was missing. Someone must have taken her there.
Yeah.
And that fact that the backpack was buried, it's like they didn't want it to be found easily, but they also didn't want it to disappear completely.
Okay, so it's not a random thing, right? Whoever put it there thought about it.
Oh, yeah. This was planned out.
Yeah.
They had a reason for burying it.
It's giving me serious ransom note vibes.
Right.
But then it gets even more confusing because inside the backpack, along with some of Asha's stuff, there were clothes and a library book that her family didn't recognize.
Yeah. None of those things belong to Asha.
So that makes you think, did she pack a bag to run away?
Right.
Why would she bring things that weren't hers?
Exactly. Or why would someone else pack a bag for her, bury it, and then include some of her things? Doesn't make sense.
So we've got all these clues. They're all pointing in different directions. It's a mess. What did the police do?
Well, as soon as Asha was reported missing, the local police started a huge investigation. They brought in the State Bureau of Investigation, too. You know, the SBI.
The state's version of the FBI.
Exactly. They wanted to make sure they were covering all their bases.
Makes sense.
And, of course, Asha's family, friends, the whole community, everyone was searching for her. They were desperate for any sign of her.
I can't even imagine. And did they find anything?
They did find a few things.
Yeah.
Actually, remember that shed near Highway 18 where those drivers saw Asha? Well, inside the shed, they found some of her things, like candy wrappers, a pencil, a marker, and even a hair bow.
Wow.
So it seems like maybe she was out on her own and trying to get out of the storm.
Right. She got scared when the power went out and left her house. Maybe she was trying to find help or go to a neighbor's, got caught in the storm and hid in the shed.
That's a possibility.
But then why leave the shed? And why would those things still be there the next day after the storm was over?
That's the thing. That's what makes this case so frustrating. Every time you think you have an answer, it just leads to more questions.
It's like one step forward, 2 steps back.
Exactly. The initial search didn't really turn up much else. They talked to a ton of people, but nobody seemed to have seen or heard anything suspicious. It's like she just vanished.
Without a trace.
Exactly.
So what about the backpack? Did it help them figure anything out?
Nope, not really. It just made things even more confusing. Even with the FBI involved, they couldn't find any solid leads. They even went public in 2016 asking for help.
Wow, so they were really stumped.
They were really. Someone had reported seeing a suspicious vehicle around the time Asha disappeared. But even that lead went nowhere.
So for years, the local police, the SBI, the FBI, they were all working on this case. And still basically back to square one.
Pretty much.
I can't imagine what Asha's family was going through. All those years with no answers.
It's heartbreaking. They've been through so much pain and uncertainty for over 20 years. But then just last year in 2024, there was a major development in the case.
Wait a minute. Are you telling me there's been something new in 2024 after all this time?
I know, right? It's pretty unusual for a case to heat up again after going cold for so long. But that's the thing with a mystery like this. There are so many unanswered questions that even the tiniest new detail can be huge, especially with all the new forensic technology they have now.
So what happened?
Well, the police got some search warrants in Cleveland County.
Cleveland County, okay.
And get this, they're now saying they think Asha might have been murdered and that her body is hidden somewhere.
Oh, wow. That's a big change from what they've been saying all these years, like the backpack was suspicious. But they never completely ruled out that maybe she ran away. So to go from that to thinking it's a murder, they must have found something pretty important.
Yeah, you're right. And as awful as this news is for Asha's family, it might actually help them get closer to the truth. I mean, they've been living with not knowing what happened for so long. At least now the investigation is moving in a certain direction. Maybe this will finally lead to some answers and maybe even some closure.
Yeah, I guess that's the hard part about cold cases, isn't it? Any new lead gives you hope, but it also brings up all the painful memories and could even lead to more heartbreak. It's a tough situation. But speaking of hope, Asha's family has been amazing. They've been doing this walk every year to remember her disappearance and to keep her story in people's minds. They've never given up on finding out what happened.
It's incredible how strong and determined they are. They haven't given up hope, and they keep reminding everyone that this case is still unsolved. That's what's so powerful about cases like this. They grab everyone's attention. And when so many people care about getting justice, it can make a real difference.
For sure. So back to those search warrants in Cleveland County. Any idea what made them decide to do those searches or what they were hoping to find?
Unfortunately, they haven't told the public any of the specifics about those warrants. They want to keep that stuff secret to protect the investigation.
Yeah.
But the fact that they're looking into murder now probably means they got some new information. Maybe a witness came forward, or maybe there's been some new development with DNA testing or something like that.
It makes you wonder if there was something they missed all those years ago. Some tiny detail that didn't seem important then. But now it could be the key to solving the whole thing.
You got it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the things that seem totally random or unimportant that end up being the missing piece. And with all the new technology they have in forensics now, they can look at old evidence again and maybe find something new. Remember, they didn't find that backpack for over a year. And who knows what kind of amazing forensic tools they have now that they didn't have back then.
It's like a race against time. You've got the family who just wants to know what happened to their little girl. You've got the investigators working so hard to follow every lead. And then you've got science always changing and giving us new ways to solve these old mysteries.
It's really fascinating how it all comes together. Human emotion and determination and scientific progress. And in Asha's case, they're all playing a part.
Okay, so we've got this new murder investigation. We've got the buried backpack. We've got a little girl walking alone in a storm. And we've got tons of questions that still need answers. As we're wrapping up this deep dive, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to think about, to really mull over?
I think the big takeaway here is how important even the smallest details can be. In a case like this, every little bit of information could be a clue. We have to look at everything from every angle, no matter how small or unimportant it might seem. We tend to focus on the big dramatic stuff, but sometimes it's the little things, the tiny inconsistencies that can help us solve the mystery.
You know, it's funny you should say that. I was just thinking about those two drivers who saw Asha on the highway. It's easy to just focus on the fact that she ran away, but what if there's more to it than that? What if those drivers have some piece of information that could be crucial, but they don't even realize it?
Exactly. We have to be willing to question everything, even the things that seem obvious.
Yeah.
And we have to look for those connections that might have been missed before. Every single detail, every witness statement, every piece of evidence could be a clue.
You know what else I've been wondering about? That backpack. Why bury it in the first place? I mean, I get that whoever moved it wanted it hidden, but wouldn't it have been easier to just get rid of it completely?
You know, that's a really good question. And it all comes back to motive. If someone wanted to make sure that Asha was never found, why go to all the trouble of burying the backpack? It's almost like they wanted it to be found eventually,
Yeah.
but not right away.
It's almost like they were leaving a message or a clue, but we just haven't figured out what it means yet. It's like a real-life escape room.
Right.
But the stakes are way higher.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it shows just how complicated this case is. We're not just dealing with a missing person. We're also trying to understand the psychology of the person who did this. What were they thinking? What were they feeling? Those are the kinds of questions forensic psychologists try to answer.
So taking all of this into account, the new investigation, the backpack, the little girl walking in the storm, all of it. What do you think happened to Asha? It's the question that's been hanging over us this whole time. What happened to Asha Degree? After all this time and with this new information about a possible homicide investigation, it's tough to even know where to start.
It really is.
Yeah.
Especially since we don't have all the details. The police haven't released everything to the public.
Right.
But we can look at what we know, analyze the patterns, consider the different theories that have been out there.
Okay.
And maybe we can start to make some sense of this whole heartbreaking mystery.
Okay, so let's start with this new development, this shift to a homicide investigation. What does that tell us, and what could it mean for the future of the case?
Well, it definitely seems like the investigators think there was foul play, which was always a possibility, of course.
Yeah.
But it wasn't their main focus for a long time.
Right.
This could mean they found something new, maybe during those searches in Cleveland County, or maybe they looked at old evidence with new forensic techniques.
So maybe they found something that connects someone to Asha's disappearance, or maybe they've been able to rule out other possibilities like her running away, which seems even less likely now.
Exactly. And by focusing on homicide, they can really hone in on their investigation, use their resources more effectively, and maybe even bring in experts who specialize in these types of cases.
That makes sense. So if we're thinking that Asha was murdered, that brings up a whole new set of questions, like who would do something so horrible to a 9-year-old girl and why?
Those are the big questions. And sadly, we may never have the answers. But we can look at other cases, see what usually happens in these situations, to try to understand what might have motivated someone to do this.
So are we talking about a stranger abduction here? Or is it more likely that Asha knew whoever did this?
Well, statistically speaking, stranger abductions are much less common than abductions by someone the victim knows. It could be someone in her family, a friend, or even someone from the community who she might have seen around.
Okay, but if it was someone she knew, wouldn't people have noticed something or said something? Wouldn't there have been some kind of warning sign?
Not necessarily. People who do these kinds of things can be really good at hiding it. They can fool their victims, gain their trust, and nobody suspects a thing for years.
It's scary to think that someone could be living a double life like that, hiding something so awful.
It is. And it just shows how important it is to be aware, to teach kids about safety, to encourage them to speak up if something feels wrong, and to be on the lookout for signs of abuse.
Well said. So stepping back and looking at everything, the late-night disappearance, the highway sighting, the buried backpack, is there anything that stands out to you as being especially important, maybe a turning point in the investigation?
For me, it always comes back to that backpack. The fact that it was buried miles away from Asha's home with things her family didn't recognize, it just points to a level of planning that's really disturbing. It feels almost ritualistic, like they were trying to say something, but we haven't figured out the message yet.
I agree. And the more we talk about it, the more I think that whoever buried that backpack wanted it to be found. Maybe not right away, but eventually. It's like they had to leave a clue to show they were involved, but they also wanted to stay in control.
That's a really interesting thought. And it fits with a psychological idea called cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
It's that conflict we feel when what we do doesn't match up with our beliefs. Maybe whoever was responsible for Asha's disappearance had to leave that backpack to deal with their own guilt.
So they're trying to have it both ways. Commit this horrible act, but also leave a trail. Almost like they want to be caught, but not too easily.
It's possible. And that's what makes this case so fascinating, so frustrating, and ultimately so heartbreaking. We have these pieces, these glimpses into the mind of the person who did this, but we still can't put them all together.
And Asha's family, they're left to deal with this unimaginable situation, not knowing what happened to their daughter, wondering if she's still alive, hoping for answers that might never come.
Their strength and resilience are truly remarkable. To live with this uncertainty for over 2 decades, to never give up hope, it's a testament to the power of love and family.
You know, as we wrap up this deep dive, I can't help but think about all the other families who are going through something similar. The missing children whose cases have gone cold, the parents who search for answers every single day, clinging to the smallest bit of hope.
It's a sad reminder that these stories, as tragic as they are not unique. They represent a collective pain, a shared sense of loss that affects us all.
And it shows us how important it is to never give up hope, to keep fighting for justice, to support those who are hurting, and to work together to make sure these tragedies happen less often.
Well said. And to our listeners, as you think about Asha's story and all the other unsolved mysteries, remember to hold on to hope. Stay aware and never underestimate the power of even the tiniest detail in finding the truth.
Because every missing person deserves to have their story told, their memory honored, and their case solved. And maybe, just maybe, by keeping these stories alive, by sharing information, and by never giving up, we can help bring some peace and closure to those who have been left behind.